This is Radio 97. Jess, let's talk law.
Our resident lawyer, Despina Priala of boutique law firm Priala Legal in Runaway Bay is with us every Thursday to offer her legal expertise by providing some general advice on the latest hot topics. Of course, having experience spanning over 25 years or more in the property and commercial law area, and she joins us right now. Good morning to you, Despina.
Good morning, Jess. Good morning, Wayne.
Morning, Despina. Well, here we go again. We've got another couple of fantastic topics to talk about, and I think this could go very long. We might have to get John Laws to come back at perhaps 10 o'clock because there's so much to talk about here. I think, well, over-regulation. I think everyone in Australia at one time or another has come across this where the government's getting into our business and we don't like it.
Exactly. And we were talking about that last week, weren't we?
We were.
With the COVID-19 vaccine.
Yep.
And the potential for what's going to happen in the workplace alone and potential lawsuits and being regulated in relation to having to take the vaccine. So, yes, I agree, perhaps.
Yeah, and it's going to get worse.
Well, this is the thing, and there's a lot of, people spouting off at the moment about Australia. Are we a nanny state? Are we over-regulated? And we may very well be. I mean, this is the thing. We do have an abundance of laws, and we have Commonwealth laws, and we've got state-by-state laws, which are similar and not so similar and quite different. So we do have to look at, and COVID's just another example that's been thrown at us to say, well, here we go again. Another scenario, yes, perhaps unique, but we do have new laws and regulations coming out. And again, it's going to impact us as a society overall and as an individual, an Australian.
And you've actually seen over the course of the years how many Commonwealth Act legislation pieces of those, we've seen them really go on the rapid increase. It's not just us thinking there's more laws, we're seeing it evidently.
Yes, well, that's right. So since I was reading an article recently, and for me as a lawyer, and I read all the time, it certainly feels this way. So the article was showing that from, say, 1970 to 2000, the difference in the number of pages in Commonwealth Acts alone, so we're not talking about state acts, just Commonwealth Acts, the average of the number of pages in a Commonwealth Act from 1970 was around 1,000 to 2,000 pages. Versus around 2000, the year 2000, which now, or at that time, we're seeing 9,000 pages in a Commonwealth Act on average. So that says something, doesn't it? Are we being over-regulated?
And we've talked before too about wearing mandated masks, and now you could get an on-the-spot fine if that is mandatory.
Well, yes, that's right. So in Brisbane particularly, I think you're talking about that example, there was a lockdown phase recently and there was a lawful direction issued by the state government about people having to wear masks in that local area, and they put that as a lawful direction and people were required to comply with that, and if they didn't, there were consequences.
And we're seeing that all the time, aren't we? Especially we have been right here on the border. In fact, I think there was 20 or 21 different sets of regulations in the time of the border closures between Queensland and New South Wales.
Yeah.
So it's just like that's in 12 months, 21 different sets of regulations.
I'm not surprised at all. So then people are saying, look, really, Australia has always been the free state, or the free country, I should say, hasn't it? Laws of free will, being able to make decisions for yourself, which of course you still can. But I think over the years we've seen an abundance of regulation, and that's why people are now coming out saying, well, are we becoming a nanny state? Really, I think we need to step back and look at it and see, well, are the regulations there for people's safety because they're in danger? And if that's the case, then yes, I agree, we should have those particular laws to help people with their safety. Domestic violence laws, for example, online safety laws that we talked about a few weeks ago, sure. But what about the other laws that are just there for, being in existence?
Just to be annoying, yeah.
Just to have a sign erected. But does it mean that someone's actually done that before in order for them to have to erect a sign?
That's a really good point. And that's what I wanted to talk about, that really the conduct of a few will then perhaps create the situation where the government says, oh, okay, well, let's just put new laws in place to regulate that conduct. And then really, isn't it the responsibility of each Australian to then be responsible and act responsibly and not take those risks and perhaps err on the side of caution and be a bit more conservative and not be sort of rogue? Because the more rogue that you become, I think that we've seen that over the last few years, Australian governments will just slap down new laws and say, well, we're going to control you and we're going to regulate your conduct in society more than ever.
Yeah, and there's been plenty of examples. I mean, we were just talking off air about one example to do with a woman wearing one of those Gstrings, for example. Just that's. I mean, I know it's only a small thing.
Suit, though.
It's only a small thing,
in
but
public.
it's just an example of how far the government has gone and moved into our everyday lives. You can't do this.
I agree with you to some extent, because the thought, when I read the article, I thought, a ban on wearing G-strings. Well, really, how far do we have to go? Of course, the flip side to that is, well,
how far are they going?
How far are they going? I mean, they say it's just, a very, nice bikini. There was a picture of it. I think it was a Guess bikini or whatever brand it was. I'm sure it was very nice. But how are they wearing it? I mean, they say they were wearing the full bikini. Were they? Were they topless? How was the bottom presented, if I can say it that way? Was anything falling out? And you said that, I didn't. So, it sort of is, you have to look at the situation case by case. And I think in that particular scenario too, in Sydney it was, in an apartment building, that they had a security guard, patrolling the pool. And when I read that, I thought, really, do we have to have a security guard? I mean, I would be offended if I went to a pool and I had a security guard watching me watching the surroundings. And because I just want to go and sunbathe, I want to have a swim. Why is there a security guard? So you have to question exactly the whole scenario. So in that particular case, it was interesting because the bylaws already said, funnily enough, if you're using the pool, you've got to be adequately dressed or adequately clothed. What does that mean?
Well, that's exactly right. And everyone would have a different idea of what that actually means. You ask, half a dozen different people, you'll get half a dozen different answers.
Well, I think if you went along any Aussie beach and spoke to the girls there, they'd say, well, isn't it my birthright that I can go on an Australian beach?
So why can't I wear it?
Exactly. But I think it comes down to, okay, fair enough. We've always had the bikini. We've had the meter maids in Surfers Paradise since the 1970s, if I'm not mistaken. So, okay, good, fair enough. But how are you presenting it now? Society has changed quite considerably. The more we change, perhaps the more that society sees that we're going rogue, a little bit, they're going to slap down laws. This particular building was allowed to put up a sign around the building to say, no jumping, diving, and no G-strings. Well, that's a first. So that's why I'm saying, how far do we go?
That's a good question.
Because there's a dress code in a club, for example. You go to the RSL and the attire you have to wear. Gentlemen don't wear their hats inside.
No, well, that's right. Actually, interesting on that point, I know a particular client that was telling me recently of an establishment in Surfers Paradise that perhaps will remain nameless at this point. It was a group of 30 that were booked to go in for a birthday party, young people, with an adult, of course, not young as in 19, 20 they were, but they had accompanying older adults. And the whole group, one particular person was refused within the 30 because they had a little tiny cross tattoo on their wrist.
Oh, really?
Simply for that reason. And they questioned with the manager and they said, absolutely not. This person is not allowed in the establishment, but the other 29 people are allowed.
They're fine.
So they actually said, you know what, we're going elsewhere. So, that's a first. Isn't that to the, the other end of the spectrum? Well, you lost the patronage, but it's the other end of the spectrum because now when we go out, we see waiters and waitresses having tattoos.
Everyone's got tattoos. Hello,
right or wrong? Yes, well, I don't have any.
Two of us in the studio do not. Yeah.
No, I know. Judge me.
So no judging there. No. I'm not saying it's right or wrong. But
there was one workplace I actually had to wear a Band-Aid over it. They requested that I did that because I was in contact with kids. And
yes.
You have to uphold a certain standard.
So it comes down to why are you not allowing that person? Is it offensive? And where the shades of grey? If you had someone turn up with a tattoo all over their face, for example, compared with a tattoo on their wrist, it's quite a big difference. So where are the lines drawn?
Aren't police allowed to have tattoos in some instances?
I've seen policemen, and pretty much every sport, a professional sportsman now has it.
Otherwise discrimination.
I think the only sport I've seen that doesn't have it is ice skating, from memory.
And curling, probably.
Curling. Yeah, oh, yes, that's right.
But they can wear the lycra too, the leotards, even if you're ice skating. So that's funny that hasn't gone through that sport.
Yes, exactly. But look, in terms of over-regulation, we do know in this country, for example, over the years, we now have mandatory RBTs. Okay, yes, good. You know, it's there to prevent people from drink driving. Okay, when we go through airports, we've got mandatory screening now,
Yep.
right or wrong. People hate it, but it's there for anti-terrorism protection. You know,
So being informed ahead of time, do we have to have that signage to know that this is a disclaimer for what we tolerate in this public space?
well, perhaps. I mean, those sorts of laws, we're talking about RBTs, everybody knows their existence because it's all very widely marketed, isn't it? Everybody knows you got to go through airports. They've got national screening up. Everybody knows about it. Wearing helmets. Helmets are compulsory. You know, query whether the laws about wearing helmets has actually prevented cyclists from injury. I don't know if the statistics will actually show that.
Well, the question is, where does it end? At what point do we say enough is enough?
That's right. So it really is the right to free will and doing your own things and your own choices versus governing society and regulating society, and how far does it go?
Yeah.
So yeah, I think the COVID is just another example, as we were saying, that again we've got new laws, and I think society will continue to be regulated in this country anyway. And I think people have to be responsible for their actions, because as an individual, you have to say to yourself, okay, my behaviour is going to potentially create new laws and new regulations, because in this country that is what's happening.
Yep,
Right or wrong.
And the problem is, once the government gets in there with a regulation, it's very, very difficult, and it takes a long time, if ever, for them to take it out of the books.
So
yes.
behave
Oh,
is
yes.
the message.
Well, perhaps. I think so.
Not so reckless, but sometimes our filter, it's hard to gauge what's right and wrong.
I think just be responsible for your behaviour more than what currently perhaps some individuals are.
And also with that vaccination policy, we can at least see it now. It's transparent for everyone to see.
Yes, so I've got the details. I can give that to you off air, and the radio station can have it, and then our office can have those details. There is a vaccination policy now out. Yes.
Because we might see some employees actually take time off if they manage to get the virus and they were told to get the virus vaccination.
Yes, well, that's right. So all sorts of consequences, yes, can come from that. Yes.
This is Radio 97, Talking Law with Despina Priala. And if you have a question to do with law, big or small, you're more than welcome to send it to us in an email. Just send it to breakfast@radio97.com.au, and we'll be happy to ask that question on your behalf. Coming up, we're going to talk about bankruptcy.